Good afternoon everyone and welcome to today's webinar, There's a Lot Happening in Parking. My name is Melissa Dias and I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm here to provide tech support if required and field any questions that come through, so please feel free to contact me if you have any webinar related inquiries during or after the webinar. Before we get started, we'll just go through some general housekeeping. Today's webinar will go for approximately 1 hour and will include question time. We'll be recording the session today and I'll email you the link after the webinar with the recording. Webinars work best when they are interactive, so please don't be shy and feel free to ask any questions along the way. You can type your questions in the question box in your side panel, and if you have any other issues you can use the raise your hand button, which is also in your side panel. In today's webinar we'll be discussing the latest developments, challenges and opportunities in parking, and also looking at recent revisions to the Austroads Guide to Parking. I'd now like to introduce you to Paul Hillier, who will be your main facilitator for today. Paul is the National Technical Leader of Incident Investigation and Strategic Reviews here at the Australian Road Research Board. Welcome, Paul.
Good afternoon, Melissa. Good afternoon to everybody out there. I wonder, Melissa, if we might get people used to using the typing in button. Where are people from? Perhaps if they could type in, we could find where we have an international listeners, or the furthest away. Do we have anybody in Western Australia or New Zealand? That'll be, perhaps people could type that in now.
Yeah, so if you just in the question panel, if you guys just want to type in where you're listening in from, that'd be great. We've got someone in from Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Tassie, so all around the place at the moment. Shanghai, we've got a few internationals, Auckland. Yes, we've actually got a few internationals at the moment, and all nationals all around Australia as well, so that's great.
Okay, well, welcome to everybody and thank you for tuning in. Great pleasure to introduce Michael Moses. Michael's going to be our topic specialist today. Raft of experience in parking, working with Luxmore Parking Safety, which is one of our divisions here at the Australian Road Research Board. Good afternoon, Michael, and whereabouts are you talking to us from today?
Oh, good afternoon, Paul. I'm based in Sydney, and good afternoon to everyone out there as well.
Interested to see straight away that Luxmore's an award winner recently for parking. Can you give us some insight into the sort of work that was for?
Yes, it was for a car park located over in WA, where we provided advice and feasibility on the upgrade and refurbishing of a site, and that included all the car park equipment, the traffic flows, the bay layouts and the like, and it's achieved quite an efficient result.
Excellent. And a number of different experiences throughout your career, Michael, I understand, with spanning over 20 years, working internationally on parking as well as within Australia?
Yeah, I worked in Malaysia and Singapore and Indonesia, Cleveland in the US with a company called Apcoa, who have since been the victim of buyout management. So however, there are some remnants left in Europe. They used to be the biggest parking company in the world. Worked throughout Australia and on various projects.
So any major differences between the sort of parking industry within Australia and overseas?
Yeah, over time there has been. I hope there's no US listeners out there, but 20 to 25 years ago the US were probably regarded as the leaders in parking and parking management, or even further back. When Laurie Wilson from Wilson Parking developed a lot of his strategy and business plans, they were based on US strategies. Now it's come to full swing, and I think Australia is probably leading the world in parking management, installation of equipment and controls and the like. So it's come the full term.
And one of the projects I understand you're very proud of is working on the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Is that
yeah, we did a bit of
nice thing to do?
Yeah, it's I think the main thing was the grading of the parking that was to be available. The overall thrust of the project was to try and include public transport in all the ticketing. So the public transport, being trains and buses, worked very well, but on top of that we had to make sure that the VIP access, vehicular access, was met. I don't know if many of you are aware, but at the time there were Commodores that were logoed with GMH in the Olympic rings that drove around a lot of dignitaries and top athletes, and they were used to ferry a lot of the athletes to the venues. So yeah, it was quite interesting.
Significant challenges, I guess. Had to get Kathy there for the start of her race with hell's high water. But moving on to parking more generally, and can make a huge contribution to the project. The last 20 years or so, I mean, my recollection going back, it's been sort of finding a bit of spare land and putting in a temporary car park there, and but a lot more happening, obviously, more than that in the last few years. Can you just give us a bit of an insight as to how things have evolved over the last 20 or 30 years?
Yeah, even further back than that. I was originally mentored by a chap called Laurie Wilson, who owned Wilson Parking, and he started out in business by an agreement with Telecom at the time. They had 8 vans they needed parking in the Perth CBD, and he found a vacant block and did a deal and parked them there, and from then on Wilson's has grown into a rather large international conglomeration. But I think it all started out when there used to be, years ago, there might be a chap with a bag around his neck and a roll of tickets, and you got your little chit, and that was the end of it. He'd put the cash in the bag, and you weren't too sure whether that cash was going to end up where it should be in the long run. So therefore, parking control equipment originally was implemented to get some form of audit and some sort of systems and data analysis on what was occurring, rather than written notes or written sheets and shift reports that were put in that could not be verified without correct counts. And it's technology's moved from there to the next step was as a labour saving device. And we all know that the days of the car park attendant have disappeared, whereas years ago there used to be a car park attendant on hand at any time in car parks. So they were put in essential pay stations and that, so people sort of help themselves to paying for their tickets and use that paid ticket to gain exit. Moving on from that, technology was further advised, put in to see what they could do to add value to what was occurring and to gain further statistical analysis of car parks. And this is where it's moved towards phone apps and LPR that doubles your entry intake capability and the like. So that equipment has gone through what originally was looked at by the car park operators and owners as to replace the labour costs and to remove that ongoing annual cost that was being incurred at the car parks, to now being something that can be used for very, very detailed statistical analysis and for adding value add for all users.
So I think, yeah, I can recall the sort of mad scramble in your car trying to find some coins to put into the parking meter, or when you come to the pay booth at the car park. But now it's all about that user experience. Is that correct? And it also gives us, I guess, the management background, as you say.
Well, that's right. Now you can pre-book parking on the website. You can use phone apps to pay. You can pay by pay wave as you're driving in and out. All those sorts of things are a benefit to customers and take the pain out of searching for a payment area or a pay station, and that's where the industry's moving. There's a plethora of phone apps and applications out there that can either find your parking or recommend locations based on your final destination, or improve and streamline the payment process.
So I guess we sometimes underestimate the importance of parking for a sort of a new design or a new urban project, I guess. Would that be the case? I mean, the public will vote with their feet. I mean, they'll give something the patronage. They all vote, of course. And I guess it's sort of vital that our on and off street parking sort of work together as part of a plan. Would that be a fair comment?
That's right. I think local governments are more and more looking at segmenting parking users, whereas they're trying to remove long stay parkers from their key activity centres off the street to encourage off-street parking. I think also they're looking at the cost of constructing new parking and balancing up what's available and what they can do with their existing inventory. So all in all, the design of car parks, particularly in the private enterprise, they're starting to see the value in spending a little bit more and getting benchmark construction processes in place and latest technology, i.e. solar-powered lighting, i.e. electric charging stations for vehicles, all sorts of add-ons that can, because in particular the life of these car parks has between 40 to 50 years. So they're looking to future-proof these developments, and that's where design is rapidly changing.
And I guess there's some other things which we need to be aware of, particularly with our innovation and the emergence of driverless vehicles. We're looking at that at the moment as well?
Yeah, the theory is, and there is growth towards that. We've only touched on advent a little bit in our update of the report, due to some of the members saying, look, well, it's not really car park as such. However, they do have a role to play in going to the final destination from some holding area car park, i.e. a long-term car park at the airport. Of how do they get the passengers from the car park to the airport? Now, it is believed in 10 to 20 years the growth in those vehicles will be such that car parks will require design in accordance with these. These vehicles, you'll be able to stack them in very, very small areas as opposed to normal vehicles. So there is a movement towards designing pillared, the dimensions between pillars in a different way to accommodate stacking of these vehicles. So that'll be the major driving behind the design changes in car parks with the ADV vehicles.
Okay, thanks for that insight, and engaging with the community and key stakeholders I think brings us nicely onto a little bit of a case study in Newcastle in New South Wales, my hometown where I am here at the moment. You're doing a lot of work in Newcastle where there's some urban regeneration going on at the moment, and that involves a lot of engagement. Could you perhaps give us a bit of an insight to the work you're doing there at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Not just in Newcastle, but very similar precincts across Australia. I think local governments of local councils are now aware that the slightest change in some of their activity centres can greatly affect their parking resources in the area. For example, if a major shopping centre is included in development, it affects on-street parking in the area, different tenants that move into major developments which generate more vehicles than normal. Like there's a case in point up in Queensland where a major callback centre for an insurer has been installed, and they have a very heavy ratio of staff and vehicles per floor area. It's over and above the normal demand. So parking has to be provided in those areas, or transport has to be improved. And with the Newcastle point-in case, there was an existing heavy rail line located along the foreshore area, which is an area called Honeysuckle. That's since been removed and will be replaced with a light rail system. At the moment, there's vacant area right along the foreshore there, and it's been developed for pay and display long stay parking. So as a consequence of the removal of the rail, there are various pedestrian thoroughfares across to the foreshore, and there's been a dramatic increase in the demand for long stay parking. This is very well patronised, but they now, in the next couple of years, are looking at plans of redeveloping all these sites. So there'll be up to 2,000 vehicles that are parking there daily relocated. So they have to find alternative areas for them, and that's where a strategy comes in place.
And you're working with the local chambers of commerce and an organisation called Newcastle Now, I believe, which is an advocacy body for the development. Any pressures there in terms of what they need as against what the council are looking to provide?
Yeah, I believe the council feel they have a responsibility to all ratepayers, and shopkeepers are one of them. And there's also in this precinct separate little activity areas for strip shops and malls. and each of these have different demands. In particular, they're looking to promote the on-street parking available by looking at increasing rates to ensure they've got a 50% vacancy, so that the customers will have confidence in finding parking right near these stores. Now, the benchmark has always been 15% vacancy and continues to be worldwide.
And this is to increase the turnover outside the shop, so you can pull up and almost be guaranteed.
At the moment, the customers are complaining they can't get parking in the area. It's as simple as that. And our experience shows that by most times the shopkeepers themselves are abusing the parking out in front of their shop. But this comes up in statistics that we do and surveys we do, and we lay it on the plate for them in various workshops. And the advantages of taking a strategy of maybe increasing the cost of hourly parking to ensure there's space available at all times.
Okay, thanks for that insight there. Melissa, we better check to see how people are travelling and whether there's any comments or observations or experiences or indeed any questions from our lovely audience out there. What are people thinking?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, we've got one question from Joshua. So when developing phone apps aimed at parking, how much consideration is given to road safety and minimising driver distraction?
Actually, we have a human factors division in ARB at the moment, and that's one of the areas we're scoping up. I think the main thing is there are councils looking at removing their meters at the moment, or considering removing their meters and installing phone apps right across the board. Now, there is a lot of kickback, particularly from the elderly, who to various reasons are uncomfortable doing it. They're used to just putting a bit of change in a meter and going away. A lot of them don't have iPhones, so it's been rolled out in some councils in certain sections with great advantage. The human factors area is yet to be explored, to be honest. Thanks for the question, John.
I think like all apps and mobility type improvement apps, there has to be that balance there between, and obviously we would be advising people to have a look at the parking app before they start their journey. Obviously have a good idea of where they're heading to. I'm personally not too au fait with how they look on particularly on a screen mounted sort of dashboard sort of mounted piece of equipment, but certainly on the mobile phone, yes. I mean, there's obviously that balance between safety and amenity there, which we need to be very aware of on that.
Yeah, great.
Is there anything?
Yeah, so just you touched on this also with your case study. We've got a general question: how can on and off street parking work together best? Don't know if you can elaborate on that.
It's one for Michael.
Yeah, one for Michael.
Yeah. I think you've got to look at it as a whole. If you look at parking, and the studies show that if you're looking to park for half an hour to an hour, studies show the first thing you look for is on-street parking within 40 metres of your final destination. The second thing they look for is an open-air car park. Surprise, surprise. They're comfortable. They can see exactly what it is. They know what they're getting into. The third thing they look for is undercover parking, and the fourth thing they normally choose is basement parking. Now, it's all price related. Unfortunately, that's the best way of talking about it. If you want to transfer vehicles off the street, you have to price it accordingly. In particular, the problems on the street occur with long stay parkers. Short stay, you're trying to encourage and encourage activity within that precinct. With long stay parking, you offer cheaper rates, you offer discounts like early bird parking, those sort of things but you do need the capacity in those car parks to do it. And also you've got to be mindful that these vehicles, there's only one turn per day normally. So if you want to advertise for 100 early bird parkers, well, during the whole peak day, that's all you can use that parking for. And you forego a lot of short stay undercover parking. So there's a fine balance. But in the main, To discourage long stay parking and encourage churn of parking on street, the rates are normally increased.
Great.
Okay, I mean, natural thing would be obviously to try and get the cheapest parking you can for as long as you can, but I think the move towards the service experience and the customer experiences mean that you know, people are prepared to pay a little bit more, I think, these days for a developed parking which has all the bells and whistles, so to speak, and the amenity and also the safety of the car park. So yeah, people will vote with their feet, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. The important thing that people should recognise when considering pricing and strategy is that the goal should be give parkers what they need and what they want. Most parkers would like to drive to work, park next door to where they work and pay nothing. We can't all work on that premise. We can encourage sustainable transport via remote parking facilities. The difficulty comes when you've got outer-lying local government areas that have no pay parking at the moment, and there's a necessity to introduce that. It takes a lot of workshops, a lot of key stakeholder discussion to introduce, say, meter parking in an area for the first time. But once shopkeepers and the general constituents get a handle on it, they understand it, but it takes a lot of convincing.
Great, thanks Michael. We might just have one last question I've got here before we move on. This is related to your case study. So with the recent development of light rail on the Gold Coast, there has been a number of incidents involving vehicles and pedestrians in conflict with the light rail. How have you planned for this in Newcastle? Or have you planned?
We're really concentrating on the parking. If you're talking about traffic conflict and incidents of safety, that's being handled by another area, and I'm sure Paul can comment on that's more his expertise.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, that's a major project for Transport for New South Wales and the Road and Maritime Services, who are the state road agency. So yes, I mean, they're looking at obviously, as with any intersection or any points of conflict, to try and maximise or optimise the safety of those. So they'll be looking at things like the relative speeds, the conflicts, and how they're going to control those movements. So work in progress. The light rail facilities are starting to get there, and increasingly more in Sydney as well in a couple of areas. So yes, I mean, we've got to make sure that we're providing as safe as possible for everyone out there. So we'll be certainly, there'll be a lot of work being done on monitoring and evaluating once it goes in to make sure that there's not any issues, and road safety auditing and things like that will become important of the project once it's opened.
Great, thanks Paul. We might move on to the update of Austroads guide now, but just as a reminder to everyone, please feel free to keep sending those questions through. If we don't get through them today in the webinar, we'll definitely, Paul and Michael, will get back to you after. And as always, we're recording today's session and we'll be sure to share the footage at the conclusion. So thanks Paul.
Thanks, Melissa. A revised Austroads guide, yes. The guide, like all things where technology is involved and integrated transport, intelligent transport systems are involved, we obviously need to keep updating that at the time. So working on the guide at the moment, the existing guide at the moment is part of the traffic management series under Austroads, and that was published in February 2008. Certainly looking at parking across the board, looking at providing that safely and efficiently, but also covering the sort of gamut of planning through to the hard engineering, if you like, of covering setting up parking controls, guidance, wayfinding, those sorts of things. So as I mentioned, looking to update that to take on board a lot of things there. The existing projects, Austroads Project NT 1800, started just under a year ago now. And Michael and his team doing part of that and involved in the consultation, looking at some of the contemporary issues and some of the future things which are happening and making sure that that's out there. Now, the update with that is certainly a final draft is in hand at the moment, and that's hopefully being endorsed very shortly for publication coming up in early this year, or if not the middle part of this year. Michael, have you got anything to add on some of the things which are being updated, or there's sort of perhaps a consultation first before we...
It's actually just been published, Paul.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, yeah, I think since 2008, when it was previously published, about 2,000 copies have been downloaded to various road agencies and local government practitioners. So it is out there, and it has been necessary, mainly due to technology, to update it. So we've been asked to look at some key parking management principles that were included in it. We've been asked to look at latest technology to update that, and we're also asked to look at end-of-trip facilities and the latest available strategies to encourage sustainable transport and different modes of transport. So that's what we've covered, but along the way we've had to update the whole report due to referencing and a couple of other matters. One of the fascinating things that has changed so dramatically over the last 8 to 10 years is the provision of end-of-trip facilities in car parks. For example, for cyclists. In the Sydney CBD at the moment, they're like creating mini hotels for these guys as they roll up with their bicycles. They've got bicycle repair shops, they've got showers, they've got free towel services, they've got all sorts of free Wi-Fi, all sorts of add-ons, and it's meant to attract some of the key tenants that are available, and this includes the major accounting firms and the major legal firms. They're demanding this type of facility be included in the car park. So there's a lot of refurbishment going on in some of these key buildings and some of the major CBDs around Australia. But also in some of the regional areas, you know, the precedent of the vehicle use is just too high to be sustainable in the future. So they've had to encourage the use of bicycles. They've also encouraging with other facilities trying to add value adds to them with baby change rooms and the like. So people are in the know in the local governments and in development see this as a key area for the future.
And what about things like managing the car parks in terms of key performance indicators and the way that we manage the car parks? I mean, things improving in that regard, and some more help in the Austroads guide about benchmarking of car parks, for example?
Yeah, I think too, they're looking at minimising the energy footprints of car parks to start off with. You know, the implementation of solar-powered lighting, the implementation of reactive lighting. As you walk by, it triggers the lighting. There's also, they're trying to look at the saving of costs over operating livelihood, even with the printing of tickets and the waste involved in receipts and things like that. And hence they're looking at some of these ticketless solutions, which include LPR, and avoid the production of tickets, and in some ways, some areas avoid the production of receipts.
Michael, just for anyone out there, just quickly remind us what LPR means, if there's anyone out there who might not know heard of the acronym.
LPR stands for License Plate Recognition, which is a camera system that records your number plate or license plate as you drive in, and again checks it against either a central pay station when you go to pay, or checks it against the number plate that's presented at the exit. The reason why it's become so popular over the last 5 to 10 years, the technology is very old. It's been around for a very long time. The reason why it's become so popular is that there's been fuzzy logic software, and there's been new cameras developed, and additional banking of cameras, putting cameras at the rear of the car and the front of the car as it goes in, which increases the LPR read rate. So read rates have gone from around 92% up to about 8 years ago to 99.8% with some systems. So it's a lot easier to recognise these. There's there's not the huge incidence of people arriving at the exit. There would have been up to 8 years ago, and then the number plate hasn't been recorded. And it also, because correctly used, it should not be used with a boom gate at the entry. It provides unimpeded access, which doubles the processing volume of vehicles you can put through each entry. Normally it's around, for a ticketed system, around 280 vehicles an hour. The LPR can allow at least 600 per hour. And when you get high volume car parks like hospital car parks, shopping centre car parks, you see it being included every second day, it's a very, very practical tool.
And I had the pleasure of attending the parking conference for a day in Perth just before Christmas, and there was a trade exhibition with a range of parking technologies, and it seemed to be a sky's the limit as to what's new in the zoo, if you like. What were some of the things that took your fancy at the exhibition and you see coming in the future?
Oh, I think the license plate recognition, the plethora of equipment that's on the market at the moment has grown exponentially. I think phone apps have grown exponentially. Not only these phone apps, they can be used by the parkers themselves, but it also incorporates enforcement to make it a lot easier for local governments to enforce. And bear in mind that there's legislation that's been brought in the last couple of years that precludes private car park operators from enforcing pay and display, or those where you go to a machine and put your ticket on a dash. It can be no longer can they obtain license plate details from the relevant road agencies to send an invoice to or a fine to. So what it is at the moment is a bit hit and miss for these private car park operators. They'll put a ticket on you underneath your windscreen, but by law they're not allowed to enforce it or send an invoice to you. So this has become very important when you look at local governments and what can be of assistance for them to enforce some of these open air car parks.
And I'm particularly interested, I love going into a car park and being assisted to find a parking space for my car, and some of the wayfinding goodies these days are very good. I mean, you see in the picture that we have here of the green and red lights, and then also on the right hand side some of the arrow systems and giving you numbers of spare spaces. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of those and how popular those are these days?
Yeah, there's wayfinding technology which basically gets you to the car park, and then there's bay finding technology which gets you to a spot once you're in the car park. One of the major suppliers of bay finding, and I think you might have seen them in some of the airport car parks and shopping centre car parks, where red denotes the car park bays occupied, green denotes one's available, and blue denotes that a disabled bay is available for parking. One of these major suppliers did a survey where they had people on little cycles, motorised cycles, following cars as they drove into a major shopping centre car park without bay finding. And they recorded the time it took for them to park their vehicles. Then they did the same surveys with the bay finding technology, and it saved 20% of the time taken to search for a parking bay. Obviously the big shopping centre operators see this as a major step forward in customer service, and they're becoming increasingly popular and the price is going down, so you'll see more and more bay finding technology installed. There are new systems that are actually out now that can actually track who gets out of the vehicle, the number of people that get out of the vehicle, do they loiter in the car park before they go to the store, what do they do before coming back to their vehicle when they enter into the car park, how many people walk through certain thoroughfares and the like. So the major retailers love this sort of information and can use it to their advantage.
Okay, and the sensors for those bay finding technologies, are they always mounted above the vehicle, or can I've seen some things about sensors at floor level, is that in the ground level?
Yeah, there are. They're mainly mounted above a camera type arrangement above the bays. However, there is parking sensors for on-street parking, which is not to be confused. They're increasing in popularity, where local governments can mount them in the roadway, and they will know exactly when a car has overcooked their time by a minute or two, or whether vehicles are attempting to just keep feeding meters. Now, it saves a lot of time in enforcement when the parking rangers do not have to keep cruising, but they can be advised directly which bay there is a car of offending vehicle parking, so they can go directly to that bay and issue the fine. So their time spent a lot more efficiently in enforcing compliance.
And that technology is sort of reliable? Can it be covered over by anything or vandalised readily?
No, it's fully reliable. The only problem they incur is that people like to souvenir them, so they're replacing them. But yeah, it's becoming more and more popular because the efficiencies you can achieve in your enforcing are remarkable.
Okay, so all of these things they would receive a mention in the new guide and insert a few more insights besides?
Yep, they're all in there. We've also talked about parking ratios as far as DAs and the application thereof. And the biggest difficulty, I think, some of the regional councils are facing is that there's a lot of competition out there between neighbouring councils or even between interstate councils of promoting the area to attract major tenants and major development in various activities. So sometimes these can be relaxed to attract the tenant, but it may be for all the wrong reasons. So we're doing a lot of work on historical work on some councils as to what the planning scheme allows for, what was actually permitted and what was actually built. And there's varying numbers that it's throwing up, and maybe something in the short term may not be the best benefit in the long term. So there is a fair bit about what's being specified as policy in states around Australia, but we're also doing a lot of work ourselves on behalf of councils, particularly with looking at cash in lieu, where they pay, developers pay amount of cash if they cannot provide the parking under the planning scheme, and it goes in a little kitty for further car park development. Unfortunately, that is another one that's got a lot of flexibility in implementation in councils as they're looking to grow their respective precincts.
And I recall we had a water cooler conversation the other day about one of the vehicle companies, Go Get, those sorts of people who are getting linked into new developments and having floors for Go Get vehicles and those sort of things, was I recall?
Yeah, that's the Go Get's the car sharing service that's most prevalent in New South Wales. There's others around Australia by different names, but for instance, in the City of Sydney precinct, the Mayor expressed an ambition to minimise the vehicle traffic within the distinct CBD and push sustainable transport. Now, one such development was developed where if you purchased a unit in that, you weren't allowed to bring your own vehicle to that unit development. You had to use a car share vehicle that was provided downstairs. So that's fairly forward thinking. It promotes shared use of vehicles and can only enhance efficiency of the use of vehicles rather than having vehicles sitting there not being used all day long in a car park. So they're the sort of things that some of the local governments are looking at to promote sustainability.
Michael, thank you for that. Melissa, how are people travelling? Do we have any more observations or experiences out there?
We've got quite a few questions coming through, but yeah, please, people, feel free to send through your experiences if you can relate to anything we're talking about today. So I have one question here that you might be able to answer. It's in relation to the Australian-New Zealand standard. and motorcycle parking. So the minimum aisle widths are as shown in, there's a figure 2.2 in the Australian New Zealand standard. These are for cars. What would be considered the minimum aisle widths for motorcycle only parking zones? Bit of a technical question for you there. If you don't know,
I
do it
haven't
later.
really looked at detail. I know for a fact most car parks are designed without motorcycle parking in view, and then following the commence of the operation, there are normally 1, 2, 3 car bays divvied up and re-line marked to allow for parking of motorcycles. So if you could leave your contact details there, I'll find some more information about that and get back to you. It's a very good question.
Yeah, great. No worries. We'll do that. I also have another question from Jason. And Jason would like to know, this is also related to driverless cars, is there any consideration of the possibility that driverless cars are rolled out much more rapidly and comprehensively than currently expected? What if no one is driving at all in the next 10 years? So I guess, yeah, you touched on the fact that, you know, when you're looking at car parks, you are looking at planning them for the future as well and adapting them. So.
Yeah, we're actually, or ARB is running the ADVI initiative for Australia-wide. We put together a team of sponsors and partners, and they include universities, insurance companies, legal firms, the whole gambit, and it's been put together to make sure that the whole process is done correctly and to get a good handle and report back on where it's heading for the future. I could probably, if you leave your details, Jason, I'll get one of our ADVI people to contact you, but suffice to say that there's a lot of generational change out there. I've got 7 children. When I was 17, 18, the first thing I wanted to do was bust my guts and buy a brand new car. Silly me didn't realise that it depreciated by 30% as soon as I drove it out the driveway of the shop. Now, I noticed my kids, they're using Uber, they're using car share, go-get cars. Some of them, it's not a real priority to have the top of the range model car when they kick off. And I think these will be the people that will take up the ADVI vehicle, more so on a car sharing basis in the future. And I would imagine that some of the hire car places will get together their own fleets, the Avises and Europe cars, and even the taxi services might get involved in it because they're getting a lot of pressure from Uber and the like. Now, if they own fleets, they've got to put them somewhere, particularly overnight and during the quiet periods. So there's an opportunity for people that operate car parks to get some revenue in there during the quiet times when these vehicles aren't being used, during the periods that the car parks are empty. I think this is one area they're looking to address of car storage. Now, whether or not they're totally remote and you can book one and it'll travel to your doorstep's another thing. I think in the interim it might just, you book it and it'll come down to the exit of the car park and you get in that way. But it's moving pretty quickly. The most detrimental thing has been a few accidents that have been freak accidents. One was in the state where the reflectivity of some paint on a truck wasn't picked up and a guy T-boned his driverless car while he was playing one of the latest computer game fads. But they're the things we've got to guard against. There's a lot of legal problems, there's a lot of policing problems, there's all sorts of issues that have been raised that the ADVI initiative is addressing at the moment. So just kindly leave your details and I'll put you in contact with that group.
I think just emphasising the importance of that optimisation of parking that we have. People have already started talking about influencing or trying to influence these businesses and offices that are near car parks and making sure that their spaces are used 24 hours a day. So a pretty traditional or standard usage during the daytime, nighttime or in shoulder periods you might have another industry or another operation start off and then their parking is taken care of. And then also overnight or in the low peak periods, you have the parking of ADV vehicles, etc., while they're waiting for their customers. So to try and make sure that our facilities are used, 20 hours plus of the time, rather than just having lots and lots of open and empty spaces as we have at the moment in certain car parks around the place.
I think, Paul, it's also linked to work habits. I remember when the Olympics were being convened, all sorts of work hours were being relaxed, and you could start work at 11 o'clock at night if you want, and finish in the morning to alleviate some of the traffic problems. I think this utilisation of resources, particularly in major CBDs, has got to be looked at and linked to work habits, where they could be working during the quieter period of times, using the car parks and getting out of them for the peak workforce. So all those things have been considered for the future.
Great, thanks, Michael. We've got another question here which is related to what we've been talking about, so you might be able to elaborate a bit more on that. How effective are green travel plans for new developments in influencing parking demand? Is there a risk that they may underestimate parking demand, and how can area-wide parking strategies have consideration for such initiatives like this?
Yeah, we've been involved in a lot of these, and some with success and some without success. I'll give you an example, which is mainly, it's a private enterprise example. Just shows you how difficult it is to change people's parking habits. Optus Park. I don't know if you're aware of it. It was developed out towards Sydney's west to get out of the CBD, and they've put all sorts of incentives there for you to arrive at work without your vehicle, with diminished success. They've offered buses, specific buses to get there. Car sharing. The car sharing has been one of the biggest failures of the lot. It's very, very difficult to get people car share. They've also actually paid incentives equivalent to the parking charges to get you on the public transport. But Australia as a nation is just used to driving their vehicles. Now we drive great distances. We haven't got a problem with driving 1,000 k's in a day, and all this greening is top of mind at the moment, and everyone feels personally guilty about it. But how do we do it? I know universities are offering cheap loans to buy bicycles. It's a very precinct-related area. If there's good transport connectivity there, yeah, maybe you can work it. But trying to promote people that have been driving their car 40 k's to a university or the like, and then saying, why don't you jump on a push bike in the middle of winter? It's very, very difficult. So it's horses for courses for success, but there is a package of things you can just offer as a standard to attempt, but it's very difficult, and it's a very, very long-term approach that's required.
Great, thanks, Michael. We might just have one more question before we move on to the end. Got question. That question was from Joshua, by the way. Thank you, Joshua. So the next question is from Katie. City of Sydney is progressive in rethinking parking requirements, like you mentioned, GoGet. Are state bodies like the RMS in New South Wales or others looking to reduce minimum parking requirements? Where will this policy change come from?
There's two issues there. RMS is evolving as an agency as well. They're reviewing what involvement they should have with regard to parking and all sorts of areas. Traditionally, say in Sydney and New South Wales, which it doesn't happen in any other states to my knowledge, RMS approves all car parking equipment that's installed on-street car parking. They have to assess that equipment and to tick it off that that's okay to put in a street. I know for a fact they're questioning their resources they have to do it, and they're questioning why they have to do it in relation to what's happening around Australia. In addition, there's certain areas of responsibility. Maybe the expertise might be better to transfer it over to local councils. For instance, drop-off areas for schools, the bay requirements for that, time restrictions. The RMS don't go around enforcing this. The poor old local government council enforces it, and they're the one that cops all the flack when a mother can't get access to drop their child off to the school, or there's an instance of 3D parking and blocking a lane around a school. So there's all sorts of questioning going on about where does responsibility lie, and I think in the future you'll see a lot more practical segregation of those responsibilities. Councils understand their precincts better than anyone else. The RMS have a brilliant statistical bank, but sometimes it's up to the people walking the streets, copping the abuse and issuing fines that eventually is where the information drips down to the hierarchy. So I've hoped I've answered that, but that's where it's heading at the moment, I think, Katie.
No worries. If you would like some more information, Katie, please feel free to contact us. So we may move on now, but just as a reminder, if you have any questions or if we haven't got to your question, we'll definitely try and get to those after the webinar by email. So thanks, Paul.
Okay, well, the future and ongoing challenges of parking, I guess. Some of the things, I think we've touched upon a number of them. It is a bit of a challenge there, and I think one of the things we're certainly looking for is to stay ahead of the game to some degree. Parking is always going to be high profile. It's always going to be an emotive issue. We've seen that it can be a game changer, the social development of an area indeed, or the economic success of a facility. Hopefully you've seen that there are some key principles, and a number of those still remain valid. There are some new ones coming on board, as we mentioned with the new Austroads guide coming up. So please make sure you go out and get a copy of the new Austroads guide. We've touched upon, I think, for example, and also general statements at the start, that there is this customer safety and level of experience or level of service which is selling parking at the moment, and there's a greater emphasis on that. People do vote with their feet. The use of technology, I think I'm a firm believer that we certainly need it to add value, and where it raises the level of service, not necessarily technology for technology's sake there. But what might the modern car park look like? Well, perhaps a bit of an insight there, you know, with the stacker systems and deployment systems, the various things which are out there now and working in some car parks may well become more commonplace. We drop our vehicle off, we leave the keys, we come back, and it's available at the door of the parking station when we've finished. A number of things working in the intelligent transport systems and the technology there, and those will continue to evolve, I guess, as more things come on board. Michael's already touched upon the apps on the mobile phone. How far will that go? Well, I think the sky's the limit in terms of that, and the technology, as we've seen in other walks of engineering and walks of life. I think that people will continue to come up with new ideas which are going to help us. I think the key message, particularly if people are operating car parks or have that as a commercial enterprise, is certainly to embrace the technology, but to seize all the opportunities as they come up. We certainly urge people to keep abreast at what's happening in parking, make sure that you look out for webinars like such as this, but also the Parking Association of Australia. Excellent body for keeping abreast and talking to kindred people, not just if you're directly involved in the industry, but also from government and road agency perspective as well. Keep in touch with what they're doing. The conference is highly recommended and is a showcase of all that's new and fantastic, and not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of policy and management of car parking, the planning for car parking as well. The conference I mentioned just before Christmas in Perth was as much about policy and planning for car parking as it was for the technology itself. So perhaps a few closing thoughts there. I want to thank you for your participation today, but particularly thank you to Michael. I'll hand you back over to Michael if there's any last sort of thoughts or last comments you've got, Michael.
No, I just think I'm a firm believer in paring back to see the simple side of things. Parking is not rocket science, never has nor will be. It requires a practical approach and a simplistic view, and to get some resolution of the outcomes you need. More than often I see things over-confused, over-complicated, different scenarios for options, and all of a sudden the outcomes are lost in the wash-up. So that's just my view on a couple of matters that relate to parking strategy and the like. I do hope that the Austroad guide gives you some detail that you might use in the future. It's our intention. I think there's about 2,000 road agencies and local governments download it. It's our intention to try and disseminate this into some of the private areas as well, so that they've got a better handle on what councils are looking at and doing with their parking. So it can be an integrated approach between the private and the public sectors. But thanks very much for joining us, and please feel free to contact me on the phone or email.
Michael, thank you. I'll throw back to Melissa for any closing information. But again, thank you to everybody around the country and indeed internationally for listening to us today.
Great, thanks Paul and Michael, and yeah, thank you audience for your attendance today, and also a very enthusiastic audience with lots of questions coming through. So as I mentioned, Michael and Paul will endeavour to get back to you personally with all your questions. We'd also like to thank again Michael and Paul for taking the time out today to put together and deliver this presentation. When I close this webinar, I would love to know what you thought and what other webinar topics we can bring to you and how we can improve. So please feel free to complete the short survey that will pop up once we close the webinar. Once again, thank you for your participation, and we'll hope you'll join us again for future webinars.